My name is Nicholas, but all my friends call me Nick. I was born in London, and now I live in New York City.
What do you do?
I run People's Television. It's a video production company based in New York City and Washington, D.C. We make animations, documentaries, commercials, and even feature films.
Do you like living in New York?
I love living in New York City. A lot of people think it's too crowded, or it's too busy, or it's too stressful. But for me, I think it's just the energy of the place is something I really love. First, it's great because my friends, my family are all here because I grew up here. But also there's so much happening culturally. There's always music going on, always films happening. All of my friends live here because I went to high school and junior high school here in New York City. What I love most about New York City is all of the different cultures, communities, and ethnicities that are here.
People who live in New York, known as New Yorkers, have a reputation for being impatient and rather bad-tempered. But this is just a stereotype. Most, like Nick, are hard-working and ambitious. What do you like about your New York neighbors?
People here are always really passionate about what they're doing, whether it's their business or their art or their job. And I love the energy that the city has.
New York is an enormous and exciting city with a population of over 8 million people. Many parts of New York are modern, crowded, and noisy. But there are also older, quieter areas that are home to lots of artists and creative young people like Nick. Which part of the city do you live in?
I live in Soho in Lower Manhattan in New York City, and I love my neighborhood because it's so full of history. A lot of the buildings are over 100 years old, and they were factories. And the building that I live in is an old factory that was turned into apartments.
Nick's apartment is great. It's on the second floor, and it's pretty big and quiet. It's the perfect place for him to relax. Nick enjoys practicing yoga in his free time. And the apartment is very convenient too. It's only a 10-minute cycle ride from his office. New York is a city famous for its cosmopolitan population. It's a city of optimistic immigrants. People who came from around the world in search of new lives. And Nick's family is no exception. So, where does your family come from?
So I have a really interesting family background. My mother's side of the family is from India, from Calcutta, which is in the east part of India. And my father's side of the family is from Europe, from what is now Belarus.
Nick's father's family came to New York to escape the Second World War, like many other European immigrants. But his mother's family story is very unusual.
So my grandfather came from India in the 1930s, which was very unusual. There weren't a lot of Indian people here in New York City at that time. Now there are a lot. And he was a blind professor.
Nick's grandmother was a New Yorker. She lived in an area of the city called the Bronx. So how did she meet a blind professor from India in this city of millions of people?
My grandmother was from the Bronx, and the story is that because he was blind, he was having trouble crossing the street, and she helped him out. And they crossed the street together, fell in love, and then they went from New York City to India and got married in the 1940s.
Nick's grandparents returned to New York from India, and both of his parents were born in the city.
My mother and my father met here in New York City. So I'm part Indian and part Eastern European.
Who do you look like?
Everybody says that I look just like my mom and that my brother looks just like my dad. I have the same skin color, hair color, eye color as my mom, and my brother has the same skin color, hair color, and eye color as my dad. So some people think we look alike. I think we couldn't look more different.
Are you still close to your family today?
I'm really close with my brother. I like to stay in touch with him, even though he lives in Germany. So we Skype or FaceTime or video chat almost every day whenever we have time. I'm also lucky that my mom lives right here in New York City, so I'm able to visit her. Sometimes after work, we'll have dinner and hang out. My family loves to travel. Every year, we'll take a trip if we have time. Sometimes we'll go to the Caribbean and go scuba diving, which is awesome. Sometimes we'll go to Europe. My brother lives in Germany, and he's an opera conductor. So we'll go there, visit him, and see his operas. And then when we have time, we go to India, which is where my mother's family is. They're amazing cooks, and we'll eat great Indian food and hang out in Calcutta, which is where her family is from.
Today, Nick is a full-time filmmaker. He owns and runs his own successful video production company. Did your parents influence your choice of career?
So my dad was always a business and numbers guy, but my mother is an artist. She was an opera singer when she was younger, and she loves movies, she loves music, and I think a lot of the artistic spirit that I have comes from her. So I think in some ways what I'm doing is really a perfect mix between my dad and my mom. They were both a big influence on me, and I hope they're proud.
Running your own video production company sounds like a challenging and exhausting business. What's your job like?
I love making movies. I've made movies since I was a little kid, and I'm always looking around and thinking about things that I see and the stories that are out there. And I'm always thinking about how to tell great stories using film. So I will go to location, interview people, work with actors, bring a film crew together that can be camera people, sound people, editors, animators, and I bring the whole team together to try to make the best film possible. As you can imagine, I'm really busy. I'm always doing 10 projects at the same time. I'm often traveling. So sometimes for a video that's only a minute long, we might shoot 10 hours of footage. I just came back from India, Norway, and Seattle doing a global commercial where we filmed for almost 10 days, and the whole thing will be edited into 1 minute.
Although it can be exhausting, Nick's job is never boring. He's got a great team around him, and he is always excited about the next project and the opportunity to tell a brand new story. And the remarkable history of his immigrant family is never very far from Nick's mind when he is working.
A lot of the films that I've made are about the stories of immigrants. They're about people who have come from one country or one culture and moved into another in the hopes of trying to have a better life. And what I'm really interested in is how can movies change the way people think, the way they feel, the way they act? How can films make people more caring about each other, make them see points of view that they weren't familiar with before, and hopefully make the world a little bit better? So our company is called People's TV because we make movies about people that you don't always see on TV.
The language that we speak isn't just a way to communicate between each other. Our language is central to our cultural identity. It's vitally important that every country can create their own film and television in their own language, and that this can be shared with others around the world. Not speaking the language of a film shouldn't stop an audience from enjoying it. In the earliest days of cinema, this wasn't a problem. The very first films were international because they were silent. It was very easy to translate the intertitles, the on-screen cards that explained what was going on. But in 1927, sound arrived in the cinemas. And this was a new challenge for filmmakers who wanted people around the world to see their films. Soon, the first subtitles started appearing on screen. While audiences were reading a translation of the dialogue on screen, they could still hear the actors speaking the original language of the film. As technology improved, it became easier to dub a film. The dialogue was translated, and the new dialogue was recorded by actors in a studio. So the audience was watching the original actors on screen, but they were listening to different actors who were speaking their own language. Dubbing soon became common for foreign language films and television shown in countries like France, Italy, and Spain. And it is still very common today. But dubbing is more expensive than subtitling, and it never became popular in Scandinavian countries, the UK, and the USA. So most audiences didn't really have a choice between dubbed or subtitled foreign language films. Today, you can watch films and TV from around the world with just the press of a button. With the incredible rise of video streaming services, audiences can now select from dubbed or subtitled versions in multiple different languages. And this demand for international content has created lots of exciting new opportunities for language lovers. This is BTI Studios in London. BTI Studios work for broadcasters, video streaming services, and film studios, adapting film and television content for new audiences. They translate, subtitle, and dub content for audiences all over the world. In their 22 offices across Europe, the USA, and Asia, BTI Studios produces over 8 million minutes of adapted content every year.
My name is Helde Jorgensen. I'm from Norway, and I've been working and living in London for a little over 3 years now. I work for BTI Studios in Chiswick. I work as a subtitler and an editor. I do translation from English and the Scandinavian languages and German into Norwegian, and I do Norwegian and German into English. So basically, what I do is I literally create the subtitles that you see on screen for television and for cinemas and for VOD clients, that's video on demand, the big streaming services.
All the subtitlers at BTI Studios are multilingual.
I come from a background of literature. I studied literature and linguistics, and I studied English literature with a bit of German and Italian literature.
Hilde works on all sorts of film and television programs. While she watches the screen, she listens to the dialogue, translates it, and types the on-screen subtitles.
Literally what you see is what we do, the physical work of it, when the block appears on screen, how long it's there for, what it looks like, what it contains, and where it leaves, where it disappears.
It's very challenging work, and she has to work quickly.
We normally measure the time it takes based on like one program, one show, one episode should take about a day. So we should do approximately half an hour a day. That's first translation, which means that we do everything from scratch.
Today, she is listening to a conversation in English, translating it in her head, and creating the subtitles in Norwegian on screen.
You create these boxes of translations that correspond with the dialogue that you hear. So it's like getting the dialogue in one ear and then the words come out of your mouth, except you're writing them down. And so you have to be able to think in two languages simultaneously.
The biggest problems are time and space. There isn't very much room on screen for text, and people haven't got very long to read the subtitles. So sometimes it's difficult to accurately translate the dialogue into short sentences.
And you have to condense the language a lot. You have to shorten sentences, shorten long speeches in order to make them fit into these small boxes that are on screen for only a few seconds.
With recent developments in technology, voice recognition, and artificial intelligence, it's easy to think that translation could be done by a computer. And maybe, one day, it will be. Computer translation is improving all the time. But there's much more to Hilde's job than literally translating every word of dialogue. And she doesn't think that it's work that a machine can do.
I personally would say that I am completely opposed to what we call auto-translation, which is basically letting a machine do the work and then just maybe looking through it and making small corrections.
The offices at BTI Studios are full of talented and creative language experts, rather than just computers, for a very good reason.
You can't train a machine to understand poetry and sense of humour and understand to read between the lines.
And sometimes, especially with idiomatic language, there's just no literal translation. And then Hilde needs to use her knowledge and experience to try to find the best possible translation. For idioms such as, "I'm dying for a coffee," a literal translation could sound very strange in some languages.
If I can't really find a good, accurate, literal translation, try to remind the viewer of the context, try to use associative words for idioms and phrases like that.
Subtitling isn't an easy job, but Hilde loves it.
Although this job can be really challenging and demanding and tight deadlines, sometimes stressful, I really, really, really honestly love my job. I would definitely recommend this job to people who are passionate about languages, passionate about film, and want to do slightly different kind of translation work. You always feel like you have done something important at the end of the day, and it's never boring, it's never dull. It is so, so rewarding.
It's the weekend in Cornwall in the southwest of England. The sun is shining and people are enjoying their free time at the seaside. Cornwall is famous for its stunning scenery, pretty villages, and beautiful beaches. And it's a popular destination for people getting away from stressful jobs and busy lives in towns and cities. And there's plenty to do with your free time here. For some people, the weekend is about the simple pleasures and taking the time to relax. At the beach, people take their dogs for walks, catch up with friends, or spend time with their families. And for others, it's all about getting active. During the working week, many people spend their time sitting at a desk, and the weekend is their chance to get moving and keep fit. You can be a successful accountant during the week and a passionate surfer at the weekend. All you need is a wetsuit, a board, and perhaps a few surfing lessons first. The beaches are full of enthusiastic sportsmen and women. All you need is a ball, a bat, and a group of friends. You can go for a swim, or perhaps explore the coastline by kayak. The more adventurous can even try to catch some fish for dinner. But while the sea and coastline are beautiful, they can also be treacherous, with strong currents and unpredictable weather conditions. Every year, thousands of people get into difficulty on the coast, and it's not just the holidaymakers who are at risk. For people like the commercial fishermen who work along the coastline, the sea is a place of work, and it's a dangerous workplace. Fishermen work long hours and are paid very little for doing the most dangerous job in the UK. They are 50 times more likely to die at work than people with other jobs. In the UK, when something goes wrong at sea or on the beach, whether you are working or just enjoying a day out, there's an amazing group of dedicated people who give up their free time to help. The members of the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, the RNLI, the charity that saves lives at sea. The RNLI was formed in 1824 to help anyone who got into trouble in the seas around the coastline of the United Kingdom. The RNLI has both lifeboat volunteers who respond to emergency calls 24 hours a day and lifeguards who patrol more than 160 beaches. The charity uses money donated by the public to pay for its work. For every £1 given to the RNLI, 81 pence is spent on providing a rescue service, while the rest is spent on programmes focused on preventing accidents happening and raising more money for the charity. Since it started, the RNLI's boats and lifeguards have saved more than 139,000 lives. Today, there are over 4,500 lifeboat crew and over 900 seasonal lifeguards working for the organisation. Most of these people are volunteers who give up their free time and put their own lives in danger to prevent accidents and rescue people in need. For RNLI lifeguards, 95% of the job is to prevent accidents before they happen at the beach. They watch the sea carefully to check that no one is getting into trouble. They have to be ready to rush to help swimmers or surfers if they get into difficulty. Lifeguards have to concentrate hard, and they only stay on duty for short periods of time before they have to take a break. Lifeboat crew members attend emergencies at sea and can be called at any time, day or night. The crew member's pager will go off and they will rush down to the lifeboat station and launch the lifeboat.
Let's go.
They have to spend many hours of their own time to become highly skilled and efficient lifesavers. So, what kind of people volunteer for the RNLI? Robin Howell is a senior lifeguard on Perranporth Beach in Cornwall. It's 10 a.m. on a Sunday in June, and Robin is starting work. He's setting up all his equipment and getting ready for a day keeping people safe on the beach. People are only allowed to swim between the red and yellow flags, as this is the area that Robin is watching. Robin has a radio to stay in contact with the lifeguard base.
My name's Robin Howell. I am a geography teacher at a secondary school in Cornwall. I have a second job, which is senior lifeguard on Perranporth Beach. I work all year round as a teacher. As a teacher, I don't work at the weekends, but from March all the way through to September, I work as a lifeguard on Perranporth Beach at the weekends. The lifeguard hours are between 10 and 6 p.m. in the evening.
Having two jobs doesn't leave much time for relaxing, and even when he's not working, Robin likes to stay busy.
I think the main problems with having two jobs is just literally trying to fit it in, in the space of a week. But I'd rather be busy than sitting at home watching TV. I mean, in my free time, I try and do as much as possible. There's not a lot of free time, but I'm doing a master's in film, and I try and do as much sport as possible. I swim in the mornings at 6:30, but I also try and do some running, and I go to a yoga class once a week as well.
And like all the busy people who work for the RNLI, Robin does two jobs because he loves them both.
I have two jobs because I love both of them. I love the lifeguarding because it's outside, it's very physical, and I love the teaching because I just like the interaction with the pupils and the fact that I can try and make a difference to their education.
"25-year-old Ben Eglington is part of the RNLI lifeboat crew in the town of Newquay in Cornwall. His crew is made up of many volunteers from the local community.
There's fishermen, builders, landscape gardeners, hotel, pub owners, fishmongers, all sorts, basically. People that own shops, fish and chip shops, all sorts.
Ben's been part of the Newquay crew for 8 years. He's a busy man who works full-time as an engineer in the Royal Navy during the week.
So I currently work in the Royal Navy. During the week, I work away in Portsmouth, which is 210 miles away. Every weekend, I make the epic journey back to Newquay to help out with the RNLI.
But Ben doesn't mind giving up his free time to help.
I volunteer my time with the lifeboat because it's good to give something back to the community. It's also a great achievement when you're out there and you actually save somebody's life.
And it's thanks to Robin, Ben, and all the amazing RNLI volunteers that the beautiful beaches, coastline, and seas around the UK are safer for everyone to enjoy.
Amy and Chip are professional storytellers. They run Snail Tales and perform stories without using a book at all sorts of locations and to all kinds of people. Why do we tell stories?
Telling stories is one of the first inventions that human beings had, which marked us as different from all of the other cavemen. It was really our way of planning what we were going to do in the future based on what we had done in the past. And it was the development of that imagination, education, and inventing, if you like, that helped us to survive where other cavemen didn't.
What do we learn from stories?
Stories are a testing ground for real life because they invite you to put yourself in the place of a main character who is facing problems and living their life and having to react to things. And so stories invite the questions, what would I do in that situation? What would be the right thing to do? There are questions of morality and problem solving, and all of those help you to think about the other people around you, how many different points of view there are, and how many different ways of tackling a problem there can be, so that you can decide not only what you would do, but also begin to understand why the character might make the choices that they do, and so why other people might make the choices that they do.
Do all stories follow a pattern?
All stories have the same shape, because all stories have a problem in the middle.
Oh, look.
Often a story will start with a character who wishes for something or wants something, and then the first thing that will happen in the story is that there will be a barrier to the character getting that wish. There will be a problem. And all stories go towards a resolution, the way that the character solves that problem or overcomes it. Or if they don't, the resolution of the story is about how the character has been shaped by that experience of not being able to overcome a problem. The problem is what gives the story its shape, what makes it into a story instead of just a description. It's like a tent pole in a tent. Without the pole, a tent is just flat canvas. And without a problem, a story is not really a story. It's just some descriptions.
Isn't storytelling just for children?
I guess storytelling is commonly seen as something that is done for children because it is, or it certainly used to be, at the heart of home life. We had the bedtime story where parents would share storytelling with their children. It wasn't really just about teaching children. It started as this way of helping human beings to survive. If you think about it now, we also have storytelling in politics, we have storytelling in marketing, we have storytelling in religion. There are so many places where storytelling is the heart of the community, and that is not just about children. It is very much an all-age art form.
Why are stories so useful?
Scientists have shown in many experiments how if you create a narrative for something, it can help you to remember things. And we did an experiment ourselves actually just a few years ago where we separated some children into two groups, and some children were given some facts to learn and the other group were told a story which contained the facts. When we tested the children afterwards, those who'd heard the story had remembered more facts than those who were told to learn them. Those children had not been told to remember anything. They had just been given a story, and yet they had remembered more.
What's the role of the storyteller?
But with oral storytelling, the real creative work is done by the audience. It's done with with their own creativity in their heads. So a better way to think of it is that we're like the conductors of an orchestra, and every single imagination in the audience is like an instrument in the orchestra, because they're all creating their different sounds or different pictures. Every single head will have a different image in it from the story that you're telling. And your job as a storyteller really is just to keep everybody on the same page and at the same point in the story.
Is modern technology a threat to traditional storytelling?
I think the first big challenge that technology gave to storytelling was probably the printing press. Because before that, stories were passed on by word of mouth much more. Books were very expensive, had to be copied out very slowly, and were difficult to get hold of. But after the printing press, people could read the stories, and so they started telling them less. And many stories became locked in at that point to the form that they'd had at the time. Stories, I think, stopped developing.
From the printing press all the way to other inventions like theatre and cinema, which were giving a real rigidity to the stories that people were hearing. So they didn't have a chance to exercise their imagination. There wasn't any of the interactivity that was there in traditional storytelling. What social media has done, though, is it has almost allowed us to go back to the bygone era where the storyteller wouldn't just be telling the story, but would be having the audience there to help them shape it and create it.
With the challenge of things like Twitter, where you have to write a very short message, and doing that is almost like a poem. In fact, all these different mediums are opening storytelling up again, because it's once again about passing on directly and through word of mouth, and stories changing very quickly. And I think that's happening again now.
What's your favourite story?
My favourite story is one called Ming-Lo and the Moving Mountain. And in the story, a man wants to move a mountain away from his house. It's very funny. He goes around the side of the mountain to find a wise man to ask him how to move the mountain, and he's sent back with lots of different methods that just aren't going to move the mountain at all. And in the end, the wise man tells him that he must dance the dance of the moving mountain, and he must do that by closing his eyes, facing the mountain, and then putting his right foot behind his left foot, and his left foot behind his right foot, and his right foot behind his left foot, and doing it 1,000 times, and when he opens his eyes, the mountain will have moved. And of course he does it, and the mountain is far away on the distant horizon. I love telling that story, especially in schools, because the littlest children don't get it. So the older ones start to giggle. The ones at the back are laughing, and the little children at the front are going, "Wow, he moved a mountain." And of course, that's the whole point of the story. And of course, his problem has been solved. He's away from the mountain. But he's done it all using imagination, and that's exactly what storytelling does.
When I grew up, the world seemed to be a much smaller place. There were far fewer choices for us to make. My mother was quite a strict person. My father died when I was quite young, when I was 6, and she had to work a lot. So it was very hard for her, and I think that had an effect on her. There was no video games, hardly any electronic equipment in the house at all. Entertainment was pretty much what you made yourself. Television was only on for a few hours a day, and children's television only ran for an hour or so in the afternoon. But a lot of the time I'd be out playing with friends if the weather was good, because there was no way of communicating with us. So if, for example, say a mealtime was set for 5:30, you had to be home for that time. I don't think we are as strict these days as they used to be. I have two of my own children, a boy aged 24 and a girl aged 22. When they were growing up, I think life was different for them. We had a firm few rules, certainly that my wife enforced. They weren't allowed out as much as we were. I used to be out a lot during the day, but my children had to be home a lot more. Expectations with, say, homework. Certainly my wife was far stricter than my mother ever was in making sure homework was done. But they have so much homework now when they're young. My children weren't allowed televisions in their rooms until they were old enough to buy their own. We had one television downstairs, and for a while my wife made us all, including me, write out lists of what we wanted to watch during the week. So you wrote down your list, and that's what you watched. If it wasn't on the list, you didn't have it on. I don't think children have it easy these days. I think the pressures on them are different to my generation and my mother's generation. I think this generation have a lot more choice than our generation did when I was growing up. Children are faced with many choices and many pressures that I didn't face when I was growing up. I think there is a problem that comes with choices because it's easy to make the wrong choices. When you only have one choice to make, it's very hard to get it wrong.
When I was growing up at school, I think the biggest thing I noticed was that I didn't know anyone else who was half mixed race. I'm half Thai and my dad's from Thailand. There wasn't a Thai community in Cheltenham, and so I quite liked being a bit different. It helped me sort of find my way, become an individual. My mum's very strong and independent, and she came from a very busy city, and my dad is he's very zen, he's very calm, and he has some traditional ideas about bringing up girls and things, and he grew up in a rural area of Thailand. Well, when I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to go to the cinema if any boys were going. I wanted to get a part-time job, like a paper round or something, but I wasn't allowed. I think that the way my brothers were brought up was different, and I don't know if it was because they're boys or whether because I'm the eldest, so they let them go out a bit more sooner, and they didn't worry about them as much, I think. And you know, Ben had a paper round a couple of years ago, and so yeah, I think they were much more lenient with them, which really used to frustrate me as well. But I've kind of come around to understanding why it was that way. I think nowadays children are growing up a lot more aware of other cultures. There are more children now who have perhaps a similar upbringing, maybe, just because I think now that there are more mixed race children. When I was growing up, there were separate communities, and so people are becoming much more intercultural and sort of understanding a bit more of other communities and other cultures and things.
My name's Marinda Wilson, and I'm British. I come from the UK. I'm in my early 50s. I've got 2 children. They're called Amy and May.
My name's Amy. I'm 21 years old, and I'm at university at Music College studying opera.
I think I'm a strict parent. I think rules are very important. I thought that my children were quite adventurous and a little bit on the wild side, and therefore rules are very important. We had, especially our mealtime rules were quite interesting, because they got so badly behaved at mealtimes that I really decided that we had to have rules, and I wrote them on a piece of paper and put them on the wall by the table, so that when we sat down to have our meals they could see the rules written on the wall, and that was quite important. We had to sit at the table, we had to eat nicely, and had to have good table manners. I think the other rule, really important rule, is bedtime. Because what I've noticed is that as soon as they don't have enough sleep, they behave badly. So bedtime is very important, and making sure that they do get to bed on time and obviously get up on time. Those were just 2 places where I imposed strict rules, and they seem to then create a certain amount of structure in the day. I'm not necessarily in control, but I know everything that they do. So I know when they go out, I know where they're going, I know what time they're coming back, I know what their homework is, I know when they've got particular things to do. And I know, for example, whose turn it is to clear the table. So it's just sort of making sure that they know, that I know, what they should be doing. And I think that really makes a lot of difference, and that's how I interpret being strict.
I think my mum was quite a strict parent. She was certainly strict about food, no sort of crisps and junk food, and I totally appreciate that now. She had a lot of rules about manners at the dinner table. Using your knife and fork properly, and we had to say, "Please, may I get down now," when we'd finished dinner. I remember her getting us to help with a lot of household chores and gardening, and not being one of those mums who just does everything for us. I remember rules about bedtime were to go when she said to go. We had to do reading before bed. Either we would read to mum, or sometimes she would read to us, depending on how sleepy we were. So she was strict, but I think in all the right ways, and she made us respect her. When I was younger, I used to disagree with her sometimes, mainly to do with social events and sort of hanging out with friends, or what I was going to do after school, because mum would try and encourage me to not overdo things so that I wouldn't get tired, and also to do schoolwork and do practice for my hobbies, for example, singing practice or piano practice. And there were times when I didn't agree with what she'd said and I rebelled. She let us make our own decisions, but would always say what she thought about them. So, for example, she'd say, "Well, you can go to the disco if you want to, but I think you might be tired the next day, or you might not enjoy it as much as you think. But if you want to, you can do what you want." So at times I did go against what she said, and sometimes those things were okay, and sometimes they didn't go as well as I wanted. And now I realise that mum is normally 99.9%, she's right.
Every gardener knows that transforming a patch of land into a place filled with colourful flowers and delicious vegetables is an endless and time-consuming task. And any garden that hasn't been looked after for even a few months will quickly start to become overgrown. But what happens when nobody has been looking after a garden for decades, and nature has completely taken over? Today, the Lost Gardens of Heligan is one of the most famous garden attractions in the UK. Situated on the south coast of Cornwall, the gardens have around 300,000 visitors every year. Over 5 million people from around the world have already visited this beautiful place. So it's hard to imagine that just 25 years ago, these gardens were forgotten and completely unrecognizable. There have been gardens here since the first Heligan Manor was built in the 13th century. There's nothing left of that original building today, but over the next 500 years, the house was rebuilt by generations of the Tremaine family, who owned the estate. From the end of the 18th century, Heligan's gardens started to become famous for their growing collection of exotic plants. Remarkably, species from China, Japan, India, New Zealand and Australia all grew well in the mild climate of the southwest of England. But Heligan relied on many workers from the local community to look after the enormous 1,000-acre estate, with its beautiful gardens and working farm. And when the First World War started, 13 of the men suddenly left to fight. Tragically, only 4 returned. After the war, the Tremaine family left, and the famous gardens started to be forgotten. When the house became apartments in the 1970s, the beautiful gardens were completely abandoned, and they were lost to nature. The story of how the gardens were rediscovered and slowly restored is a remarkable one. And it's a story about the dedication of a few individuals and the hard work of a whole community who came together to bring something beautiful back to life. The dream of restoring the lost gardens of Heligan was first born in early 1990. Tim Smith, a former record producer, and John Willis, a descendant of the Tremaine family, visited the abandoned gardens looking for a place to start a small farm. Candy Smith, who was married to Tim and has worked here since the very start, tells us more.
I came to Heligan in February 1990, which is now more than a quarter of a century ago. Our children were young. We'd only recently moved to Cornwall. And he came here with the then owner, John Willis, who had inherited the grounds from his great uncle. My first impressions of this place were literally the day after Tim came here, and it is unbelievable that we're actually standing in the same place now. The whole of the garden area was completely overgrown. I think the biggest challenge was actually persuading other people that the restoration could be undertaken.
Tim knew that he could not transform the lost gardens single-handedly. Luckily, he knew a local builder, John Nelson, who was ready for a challenge.
He was also someone who wasn't afraid of hard work and adventure, and he signed up with Tim as an informal partnership to just making this happen.
Initially, the cost of clearing such a huge area of overgrown land was the biggest problem. It was very expensive to employ people to work on the land.
So John decided that he would clear an acre of ground and see how long it took him, and then work on multiplying that. So he came in single-handed and started clearance.
News quickly spread about what was happening at Heligan, and volunteers from the local community started offering to help. And some local people offered more than just their time and energy.
There were hire companies with the most amazingly useful tools who said, well, look, you can borrow chainsaws for a week, or you can have a digger for a week. So there were a lot of people who were informally involved very early on, and it became a real passion for them.
In April 1992, Heligan opened to the public for the first time.
Right now we're celebrating 25 years since we opened to the public. But the fascination with Heligan is that we opened to the public when the restoration was only in its very early days. So visitors, early visitors, came and saw this place, in some places as we found it. So they have shared the adventure.
The restoration of Heligan has continued to this day, and the staff haven't finished their work yet. There have been many setbacks along the way, and there's always a new challenge. Today, the garden has around 20 full-time employees and many more seasonal and volunteer staff. And some of these people, like Candy, have worked at the garden since the very start and have watched its transformation. In 1993, a boardwalk was built through the area known as the jungle, so visitors could see all the amazing exotic plants that have been growing here since the late 18th century. And since 2014, brave visitors have been able to cross the jungle on the 30-meter-long rope bridge. At the wildlife hide, visitors can see beautiful local birds and learn more about the management of the natural environment. Conservation, biodiversity and wildlife management have always been important considerations at Heligan. By the year 2000, the vegetable garden was producing crops again, and the farm was thriving. Many of the fruit and vegetables grown here are heritage breeds, old varieties that aren't used much in farming anymore. Today, most of the food served in the Heligan restaurant has been grown in the garden or on the farm. The planting is still done by hand, using traditional tools. Gardeners have been doing these jobs the same way since the earliest days of the estate. And recently, Heligan started offering apprenticeships to young people who want to work in the gardens and on the farm.
We're still trying to reintroduce the old ways. And for me personally, I think the great attraction is to see a working garden, to see staff in the garden every day going about their business, and our visitors witnessing and being able to talk to people who do physical work and skilled work today. We also have heritage breeds of cattle and pigs and cows and chickens, and getting up close to those animals is a really awesome experience. It's amazing to watch people meet their first cow or their first baby lamb, or watch a lamb being born.
The restoration of the lost gardens of Heligan is a heartening story of a community coming together to bring something beautiful back to life. And these gardens will never be forgotten again.
Were your school days the best years of your life? What do you remember about the schools you have attended? Was your school an exam factory? Or did your school encourage sport and outdoor activities as much as academic studies? Did your teachers let you express your creativity through music, art, and drama? Or did they make you sit behind a desk all day and give you hours of homework? Did you have to wear a strict uniform? Or were you allowed to wear your own clothes? From the first day that we walk into a classroom, our school starts to shape the person that we become. An inspirational teacher can encourage us to do better and help us to reach our goals. And if we are lucky, the friends that we make at school will be there for us through the difficult teenage years and be by our side for the rest of our lives. The kind of school we attend can have a huge impact on our future life and career. And for a few talented pupils who know exactly what they want to do in the future, there's an unusual school that is helping them to achieve their dreams in very practical ways. This is Redroofs-School for the Performing Arts in Maidenhead, a town 30 miles west of London. The tiny school, whose main building is a converted home, has its own 160-seat theatre, and it is preparing its pupils for life as stars of the stage and screen. The school was founded in 1981 by June Rose, and it is still run by her family today.
This is it.
Creativity was central to June Rose's beliefs, so skills such as acting and singing are taught alongside academic subjects. While Redroofs may be small, it has some very famous old students, including former head girl and now Academy Award-winning actress Kate Winslet, who attended this school from the age of 11 to 17. Today, around 85 pupils attend Redroofs-School for the Performing Arts. The school takes full-time pupils from the ages of 11 to 18. There are around 10 full and part-time teachers, so the classes are small and there is a very low student-to-teacher ratio. As well as studying for the core academic subjects like English, maths and science, and preparing for exams, the pupils spend about half their school day studying vocational subjects like dance, acting and singing. The school has 4 classrooms and 4 performing studios. The timetable is crowded and the pupils are always busy. It's very hard work, but these young people are talented and very mature for their age. And their teachers are supportive and dedicated. What is more, most of the teachers here have a performing arts background themselves. So they really understand the challenge of trying to study for an exam while rehearsing for a big show. And they often teach both academic and vocational subjects.
My name's Anthony Mackey, and I teach acting and English at Redroofs. I haven't always been a teacher. I've been teaching now for about 4 years. But before that, on leaving university, I went into the wonderful world of acting.
Today, Anthony can combine his love of acting and teaching, and he is able to share his enthusiasm with his pupils. And he believes that Redroofs offers its pupils more than just academic study and vocational training.
We want to try and produce better rounded people when they're going out into the world.
And Anthony knows that all his students will get the best possible start in life here at Redroofs.
My name is Harley Joel Emmett. I'm 14 years old. I'm in Year 9 and I go to Redroofs-School for the Performing Arts.
My name is Ellie Pearson. I'm 15 years old. I'm in Year 10 and I go to Redroofs.
My name is Joshua Anwar. I'm 18. I'm in my first year of sixth form.
Pupils come to Redroofs at different stages of their education. And for most of them, arriving at the school is like finding a new home full of people who understand and support them.
My last school was just a standard secondary school and then I moved here in Year 8. When I first started Redroofs, I remember walking in and knowing that this is where I want to go and this is what I want to do.
On my first day at Redroofs, I just remember everyone being so happy and friendly and welcoming to me.
Combining the academic and vocational sides of their education can be difficult. But these pupils are up to the challenge. And their teachers play an important role in motivating them to focus on their academic work while they are dreaming of becoming a film star or singer.
I do both academic and vocational studies. My best academic study is maths, my least favourite is science, my best vocational study is street dance, and my least favourite is ballet.
My favourite academic lesson is probably history because we do a lot of our learning through presentations and acting it out, which really helps me learn.
My best subjects, I would say, are vocational, and my least favourite are academic because I'm not as strong on them as I am in vocational.
And of course, they still have to do exams too. But the teachers help them to prepare well.
When it comes to exams, I do get quite nervous, but after being at Redroofs for 2 years, my confidence has grown and I don't get as nervous anymore.
With the strong focus on vocational training, all the pupils have very clear plans for their futures.
Push up, 2, 3, 4, then...
When I leave Redroofs, I want to go to dance college and work professionally in dance, and after my career has ended, I'd hope to go into dance teaching.
After I leave the school, I hope to study performing arts for another 5 years and then hopefully become a performer in the West End.
After leaving sixth form, I would love to go on to further education for musical theatre and hopefully go to West End and then afterwards maybe teach.
The pupils at Redroofs are being given the opportunity of a lifetime. They get to attend a school that not only gives them a great education, but trains them for their chosen career and guides and supports them on every step of their journey. These Redroofs students are going to have very happy memories of their school days.
My favourite thing about being a Redroofs student is definitely being able to perform in the end of year shows, because I like the way that we all work together and the whole school can perform together.
The best thing is definitely the environment and how everyone is like a massive family and everyone's just so supportive of everyone else.
And maybe one day, thanks to Redroofs, some of these pupils will be collecting their own Academy Award too. Throughout history, mankind has always been fascinated by space. With the development of new technology, humans have travelled further into space than anyone predicted was possible just 100 years ago. In the 1950s and 60s, enormous progress was made in space exploration. It reached its peak when Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon on July the 20th, 1969. But this progress wasn't made just because of developments in technology, as physicist Anu Oja explains.
Human space exploration started in 1961. That was half a century ago, with Yuri Gagarin being the first human being to orbit the Earth. Now, when we look back in time, the original reason for going into space was this political battle, this struggle between the Soviet Union, Russia, nowadays we think of it, and the United States, communism against capitalism. And that's why humans went to the moon.
Through the 1970s and 80s, the United States and Russia continued to dominate space exploration. But in the past 20 years, things have started to change.
It's true to say that in the early years of space exploration, it was individual countries competing against each other. We had the United States against the Soviet Union. But in the last 20 years, we're seeing more and more international cooperation.
And the greatest example of this cooperation is the International Space Station, which has been in orbit since the late 1990s. The International Space Station is a collaboration between the Russians, the Americans, the Europeans, the Japanese, the Brazilians, and many other countries. And while countries like the United States are reducing their investment in space, other countries are just starting to get involved.
When it comes down to space exploration, space science, space technology, a lot of people have this idea that it's just NASA, or it's just the European Space Agency, or it's just the Russians. What we found in the last 10 to 15 years is some of the countries that are emerging financially are also starting to play a bigger and bigger role in space.
Today, many countries from China to France can launch rockets. The Indian government has a very active space program. In 2017, the Indian Space Research Organisation set a world record when they launched 104 satellites with a single rocket. In the future, it could become increasingly difficult for many countries to justify spending on space programs. When people ask the question, why do we spend all our money on space science and space technology? What difference does it make to our everyday lives? To understand why space programs are so necessary, we need to ask ourselves what would happen if we didn't have any of this space technology.
The best way of trying to understand just how much we get from space science and space satellites is to imagine what would happen right now in the 21st century if we switched off all the satellites orbiting the Earth. What effect would it have on our lives? No GPS systems, no sat-navs in cars, global telecommunications, getting signals, getting news, getting sports coverage, global communications, all of it would completely stop within 1 or 2 days. And the way we live our lives is so dependent on this that life would get pretty uncomfortable, even in the space of just a week. We need satellites to maintain the way we live our lives in this century.
Space technology also plays a vital role in monitoring the weather and environmental change.
Every year, thousands of lives are saved by the information coming from weather satellites. And if we want to understand what humans are doing to the environment, there are lots of concerns about climate change. Is climate change real? Yes. How much of it is being caused by humans? That's what we're still not sure about. But in the last 10 years, we've got a network of satellites that are what we call Earth observers. They're looking down at the planet. They're helping us understand the planet better.
Increasingly, travelling into space has less to do with human exploration and much more to do with big business. Unmanned spacecraft are being used to launch commercial satellites, and for space enthusiasts like Anu, this is a concern.
In my opinion, there is a difference between space science and space applications from satellites and human space exploration. Humans have been into space since 1961, but only 500 people have gone in the last half century. And of those 500 people, only 24 went to another world. Those were the Apollo astronauts that went to the moon between 1968 and 1972. And 12 of them walked on the moon. When we think of how long ago that was, there is a lot of concern about why do we do human spaceflight? Why do we explore? Now, in my mind, being an explorer, wanting to know what's over the horizon is part of what it is to be human. When I was a child growing up, it was human space exploration that made me want to be a physicist, then a scientist, and that is what led me to the job I have now. But for the last 40 years, we've just been going around the Earth.
So what's next for the people who still dream that one day they will be able to see the Earth from space? For the people who hope that one day they might be able to set foot on the moon, or even visit another planet? For many years, some people have believed that the age of mass space tourism is on the horizon. But over 15 years since the world's first orbital space tourist, businessman Dennis Tito, paid around $20 million to spend 6 days on the International Space Station, the development of this industry has been slower than predicted. And Anu is a realist about the future.
When it comes down to space tourism, the idea of thousands of people taking holidays in space will be as much a fantasy in 50 years' time as it is today. The challenges of human space exploration and staying in space are still extreme.
Today, the competition to be the first operational space tourism company is fierce. And organizations run by billionaire businessmen are leading the way. Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, Elon Musk's SpaceX, and Jeff Bezos's Blue Origin are all developing spacecraft and promising trips for private citizens in the next few years. While Virgin have already built a spaceport in the desert of New Mexico in the USA, they have also experienced many problems and setbacks with their spacecraft. But now, SpaceX have announced that they will launch 2 private citizens on a trip around the moon in 2018. They're not revealing how much this trip will cost, but they say their passengers have paid a substantial deposit. And experts guess the ticket is likely to cost over $100 million. There will be very few people who will ever be able to afford to experience space tourism and be able to say that they are an astronaut. For most people, the experience will never be worth the enormous cost and the very real risks.
There is a very good reason why, since 1961, only 500 people out of the billions of people alive have ever been into space. And it's to do with the enormous amounts of energy we need and the enormous limits of science and engineering that we have to try and face. Now, rocket science and rocket engineering, it's safe. But even though 500 people have been into space, 18 have died in the process. Human spaceflight is not 100% safe, it's a risky business. And so whenever human beings want to explore and they want to go further, there is always a risk factor. I think for the foreseeable future, human spaceflight is going to be about going around the Earth, is going to be about doing experiments that we can't do on Earth, and it's going to have some fantastic discoveries that are made. But for me, that is not what space exploration is. While space tourism is an idea that I think would be fantastic and I would love to experience, I don't think we're going to see a time in the next century when we have thousands and thousands of tourists taking holidays in space. I think that's more science fiction than science fact.
Hygge. If you've never heard this word before, you've never lived in Scandinavia, or you haven't read any lifestyle magazines for a while. It's not an English word, but if you've been into any bookshop in the UK in the past few years, then the chances are you will have seen a display of books on sale that offer to show you how to feel better by bringing a little hygge into your life. In the UK and beyond, the word hygge has started appearing in cookbooks, in magazine articles, and all over the internet. It has appeared in the shortlist for the Oxford Dictionary's Word of the Year, and as a hashtag in millions of posts across social media. But where did it come from? And what does it mean?
Hygge is a Danish concept which roughly translates as coziness.
Hygge is a Scandinavian way of life, and it's all about happiness and well-being.
There's no real direct translation into English, but it kind of roughly means spending time with the people that you love, doing things that you enjoy, slowing down the pace of life, and just kind of being content.
This is Kaylee Tanner. Kaylee lives in Brighton, a vibrant and exciting seaside town on the south coast of England. By day, Kaylee works in marketing. But in her evenings and weekends, she runs a successful blog called Hw5e.com, dedicated to all things Hygge. Why does Kaylee think that everyone is interested in Hygge now?
I think the unstable political environment we're living in at the moment means that people are kind of seeking this comfort more than ever before. Every time I speak to a Scandinavian about this, they're very surprised that Hygge is kind of taking off around the world. There are people as far as, Japan and South Korea and Australia, absolutely everywhere, suddenly taking an interest in something that's been part of the Scandinavian way of life forever, really. I absolutely adore Scandinavia. I've been so many times, and every time I go, I just fall in love with it all over again. So I started my blog Hello Hygge in January 2015 after reading about the concept of Hygge in a book called Scandinavian Christmas.
At that time, if you'd looked on the internet for information about Hygge, you wouldn't have been able to find much in English.
So I decided to set up an English language blog all about the concept.
And as interest in Hygge has grown around the world, so has Kaylee's blog.
There's a big variety of things on my blog. It's I'd call it a lifestyle blog.
The site features articles on things like food, travel, health, and decorating your home, as well as interviews with authors and experts.
And it's meant to be just a kind of cosy space on the internet. I think the internet does need some more comfort.
A lot of the articles on Hello Hygge are full of beautiful things you can buy. But if you just couldn't afford these things, could you still live a Hygge lifestyle?
The best thing you can do if you don't want to buy anything but you still want to Hygge is to just spend time with your favourite people. So whether it's friends or family, just invite them over, have a nice, fun, relaxed evening with them, or go for a walk, go to the park, go to the beach. Just spend time with the right people, and I think that's the best possible way to Hygge for free.
And she has some advice for the phone addicts too.
Just ignore the screens and focus on the people that are there in front of you. I think so many of us these days are just so tied to technology, and Hygge gives us a reason to kind of turn everything off and just focus on the people that we want in our lives. And I think that that's a really important way to bring Hygge into your life.
Hello Hygge has been very successful. If Kaylee hadn't started her blog, she would have missed out on some very exciting opportunities.
I was asked to appear live on Norwegian breakfast TV, which was very strange. I'd never been on TV before, so that was unusual, but something I'd never do without the blog. So it's great to have all these opportunities to do some different things.
Today, people think of Hygge as a Danish idea. But the origin of the word is actually Norwegian. It was borrowed by the Danish in the 18th century. Its original meaning was to do with seeking protection and shelter from the harsh cold weather of the Scandinavian winter.
I think because Scandinavia is such a cold, dark part of the world for so much of the year, I think that it plays a massive role in Hygge, because in those long, dark winters, people need something to keep them going. So it's a way for them to kind of combat this with coziness and warmth and kind of bringing some light into the cold winters, which I think is a really nice concept.
And as light and warmth play such an important role in Hygge, it isn't a surprise to see that people in Scandinavia have found new and innovative ways to overcome their cold, dark winters. The tiny town of Rjukan sits at the bottom of a very steep valley. During the winter, the sun never rises over the mountains. For the residents of this town, it wasn't enough to just light a fire and wait for summer. Instead, they built mirrors on the mountainside. Today, these mirrors reflect the sun down into the town square. And it's clear to see the difference it makes. If they hadn't built the mirrors, then the whole town would have remained in darkness for 7 months every year. Instead, for a few hours, every day, all winter, the little community comes together to share the little sunshine they have. It's given them a time and place to enjoy being together. It's brought light and warmth into their lives. And it has made the whole town happier. Perhaps this is a perfect example of Hygge in action. To the Scandinavians, Hygge is so much more than a buzzword being used to sell things. It's not just about buying books, baking delicious pastries, or decorating your home with fancy candles and fairy lights. It's about putting away your work, putting down your phone, and spending time in the warm company of the people you love. And maybe, if we could all do that, then we would all be a bit happier.
My name is Martin Rees. I'm a magician and I've been doing magic most of my life, but I've been performing professionally for about 15 years. Through, you can then take the deck, for instance, and go 3, 2, 1, and then give the cards a shake, and then they go red and red and red and red and red all the way through. I've always loved magic because of what it makes you feel when you watch it, and I first got into magic when I was 4 years old, when I got a magic set for Christmas. When I was growing up, I really loved Paul Daniels when he was on the TV, and that's what first got me into magic. And also I like David Blaine. He did lots of really good card tricks and really good visual tricks on TV. That's when I first really got into magic and started performing to people. So, come on, and you can pull the ring off of the string once again. Just so you're happy. I did my first magic show when I was 12, and it was for a wedding, and the reactions I got were amazing, and it made me realise that is what I want to do as a job. The best thing about being a magician is seeing people's reactions, because especially if someone's having a bad day, then you can brighten up their day.
Martin specialises in close-up magic.
I do specialise in close-up magic, which is up close with people. You'll have 1 or 2 or a small group of people stood around you watching, and the great thing with it is that they can see and they can feel what you're doing, and you can borrow their things. Close-up magic is magic with anything. It could be cards, money, people's personal objects like mobile phones or rings or different things they have in their pockets.
People must react to Martin's tricks in very different ways.
Some people do like to try and figure out how the tricks are done, and it's interesting listening to what the ideas they have of how it's done, because most of the time they're completely wrong, and what they think has happened is completely the opposite to what has happened. You get different people though. Some people just love watching magic, and that's it. They don't want to know the secret. You get your people who love magic but have to know how it's done and are constantly saying, how did you do that? How did you do that? And then you've got your people who just don't like magic. It scares them. They don't want to know. And yeah, they're the people who I like to impress the most, because they're a challenge, because they don't like magic, and I'd like to make them change so they do like magic.
Martin had built up a good career performing close-up magic at weddings, birthdays and business events. He'd performed in children's hospitals and on national television. But this kind of success couldn't have been enough for Martin, because in 2016 he worked out a way of becoming a world record-holding magician.
Inside the twigs, so if you open it up, there is a folded up playing card, and if you unfold that playing card and open it up, it is the two of spades in it. There we go. There we go. How about that?
How do you become a world record-holding magician? It can't be easy. Martin decided he didn't want to break another magician's record. He wanted to set a brand new world record. Something that he could do that no one had ever tried before.
The idea for the world record started when I started working for a children's charity who go to Great Ormond Street and other hospitals. So initially I was going to do a sponsored skydive and do a couple of magic tricks on the skydive to show the kids in the hospitals. But as the idea grew, someone said, why not look and see if there's a world record that you can do? So I looked into it, and not many magic tricks have been done as a world record on a skydive. So I thought, well, why not do the most magic tricks on a skydive?
It can't have been easy to practice for this record-breaking attempt. How on earth did Martin prepare for something like that?
So I started going to an indoor skydive centre, which has a wind tunnel that blows wind in a big loop, and the wind blows at about 120 miles an hour.
It must have been very challenging to do magic in that situation.
So I had to think of different ways of making the tricks work inside the wind tunnel, while also holding on to them as hard as possible in case they blew away.
It may have been difficult, but Martin clearly impressed the people who were watching him practice.
The manager of the wind tunnel said, why not do a world record in the tunnel? So I did that, which was the most magic tricks in a wind tunnel in 3 minutes.
So, Martin had set his first world record. But his biggest challenge was still to come. Throughout his training, Martin had always planned to attempt his world record skydive in August. So how did he end up doing it in November? Well, it turns out that some important people had heard about his wind tunnel record.
Once I did that record, Guinness World Records called me and said, we know you're doing your skydive record in the summer when it's hot, but would you do it as part of Guinness World Records Day, which is in November? So we did the world record in November. The problem with that was it was so cold because we jumped from 15,000 feet, and at that height it was about minus 20 degrees. So within 5 seconds of leaving the plane, my hands were so cold I couldn't feel the tricks in my hands, which made it a lot more difficult.
To set a new world record, Martin needed to perform 10 tricks on the skydive. But his hands were too cold, and he couldn't do 10 on the first jump or on the second jump. And he only had one more jump because the weather was changing, and he wouldn't be able to jump in bad weather.
But after a couple of practice goes, I did do the record. I had to do a minimum of 10 magic tricks, and I managed to do 11 on the skydive.
So Martin became a double world record holder, and he appeared in news reports around the world. The publicity was great for his career, and Martin is planning to break some more magic records in the future.
So there is a record for the most magic tricks underwater, and I want to do this record because, one, it's opposite of air, so from the air into the water, but also my biggest fear is being underwater. So I want to overcome my fear as well as doing this world record. 4 pieces.
But until then, Martin is back on solid ground, doing what he loves most: performing magic right in front of people's eyes.
Right. Slowly burn the pieces together. I go 3, 2, 1, like so. I can actually burn the pieces of your card back together.
Today, all films make use of special effects, and most use elements of performance capture to digitally create characters and bring them to life. Tim Doubleday has been working in performance capture for over 12 years. During this time, he has worked on many exciting projects, from music videos and blockbuster feature films to groundbreaking video games. He has seen incredible developments in the industry over the last decade. But however much the cameras and computers improve, the basic process of trying to capture an actor's movements and translate these into an expressive digital character remains the same. And it's this process and its incredible results that Tim has always loved.
So I got into the performance capture industry because I had a real passion in video games and in films. So from an early age, I always used to play video games, whether it be a Nintendo, or later years, I moved on to personal computers, PC, gaming. I did a degree in animation at Bournemouth University, and there we studied not only animation, but also the more technical side of animation. At the time, motion capture wasn't really a thing, so it was more about studying programming and studying art and animation together.
With his degree in animation and his love of video games, getting a job in the performance capture industry was a dream come true for Tim.
So I really enjoy this field because it's kind of it's always changing. The technology is always moving, so it moves really quickly and you always kind of have to keep up, and there's always new things to learn.
Today, with the video games market booming around the world, the demand for high quantities of performance capture content is increasing all the time.
So for a video game, maybe it might last 20 hours or even maybe 50 hours, whereas a film will only be 2 hours. And maybe within that 2 hours, there'll only be, I don't know, say 20 minutes of actual performance capture visible on screen. So performance capture is becoming a lot more common now in video games and in films especially. So as the demand's been there, the technology's improved and the costs come down as well.
Modern performance capture technology is so good that sometimes we have to remind ourselves that many of the characters we see on our cinema and video game screens aren't real at all. While the end results look incredibly realistic, the beginning of the process of creating them is less impressive and even a little comical. Today, Tim will be capturing some movements of Mike's body for the development of a computer game. Collecting the movements of a performer's body is also known as motion capture. And it's just one part of performance capture. The process starts in the studio full of special infrared cameras, which are all linked to a central computer. Because the cameras are recording movement in a 3D space, Tim's first job is to make sure that the computer understands exactly where each camera is. This is called system calibration. It is done using a strange T-shaped stick with 5 bright red lights. The stick is waved in front of the cameras. Each camera records the movement of the lights, and the computer collects that information. Tim watches this on his computer screen.
Recording.
When the system has collected enough data, the camera light turns green. When all the camera lights are green, the system is ready. Mike puts on a skin-tight black suit, and then he has to show the cameras and computer what his body looks like. So he needs to stretch and bend in all directions in front of the cameras, while the computer collects lots of information about how his body moves. This is called subject calibration. Now that the computer understands where the cameras are and what Mike's body looks like, the next stage can begin. Tim adds reflective markers to all the important points of Mike's body. Every joint that moves. It's important that the suit is very tight, because they're really trying to capture the movement of the skeleton, not the skin. So they don't want the markers to move from the joints. Once Mike is covered in markers, they are ready to start recording his movement.
You just turn your arms upwards.
The cameras capture information from each of the markers as Mike moves, and the computer processes it all. The movements create the digital character on screen, and the data is recorded for use in the development of the computer game. Recording the physical movements of a person in a studio is only one stage in the performance capture process. Away from the cameras and the lights, behind the scenes, more time-consuming work begins. The computer programs that Tim works with are incredibly powerful. They process and translate all the data captured in the studio to create a moving digital skeleton. But often, the cameras haven't recorded all the markers. Or maybe one has fallen off the suit. So the computer doesn't have all the data it needs, and the skeleton doesn't move correctly. So the first thing Tim does is to check and add any missing data himself. This can take a long time, and it is especially difficult when there's more than one person in the scene. When all the data is correct and the skeletons are moving perfectly, Tim can cover them with a computer-generated skin, and they start to look more like bodies. From here, the work of computer technicians and animators will turn them into all kinds of characters and creatures in the world of the computer game or film. Of course, there are limits to creating digital characters using performance capture. You can have the most powerful computer in the world, but you are still limited by how the human body can move. However, the skill of many of the performers behind the digital characters is amazing. Often, they can move and bend themselves in unbelievable ways. And it's a physically demanding job, especially when they are working on developing characters for video games. Performers have to repeat the same actions again and again in slightly different ways, so that the video game players have lots of different options. A character might cross a river, or they might fall in the river. The performer has to do both.
So an actor's performance is everything to us, really. The technology can only take us so far. It's really down to the performance of the actors to carry the scene and to carry the performance across. So, for example, you might have somebody walking across the stage and they might just do a normal average walk, whereas if someone's really put some life into that walk, it's going to be a lot more appealing. So in terms of the technology, we really like to take a step back and let the actors come through and deliver their performance as naturally and kind of in a most natural way possible.
With his years of experience in the industry, Tim knows better than anyone that it is the performers, not technology, that are really the heart of performance capture.
We all like to think that we have a social conscience. We want to do the right thing, and we believe that if we could, we would try to help people who are less fortunate than ourselves. But it's still inspiring to see other people putting these thoughts into action. When Bill Gates started his computer company, Microsoft, in 1975, he couldn't have guessed that fewer than 25 years later, he would have become the richest man in the world. Gates made billions of dollars at Microsoft, and in 1994, he and his wife, Melinda, started using their wealth to help others. In 1999, they started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and, with the help of other rich individuals like Warren Buffett, they began making a real difference to the lives of people around the world. In 2008, Bill Gates started working full-time at the foundation. By 2010, the foundation had given over $24 billion to programs around the world, with work focusing on global development and healthcare. Much of this work focused on preventable diseases that affect the developing world. 2/3 of deaths in children under 5 in developing countries are due to diseases that can be prevented, such as malaria. Malaria is spread by the bite of a mosquito, and it causes nearly 1 million deaths every year. 95% of these deaths are in Africa, and 85% of those who die are under 5 years of age. But you don't need to be wealthy to make a difference to people's lives. The day-to-day work of an individual can be just as important as the huge resources of a billionaire's foundation. Sometimes you just need to have the time and the desire to help make a real difference. This is Pam Llewellyn, a nurse from a small town called Upton in England. When Pam retired at the age of 59, she knew that she wasn't ready to simply stop helping people. And just a year later, she was living in a remote rural town in Uganda in East Africa, using her experience as a nurse and working as a member of an organisation called Voluntary Service Overseas, or VSO. So, were her family surprised at her decision to give up her comfortable life in England to go and work in Africa?
I don't think they were surprised, really. They know that during my life I've done slightly different things. I retired at 59 knowing that I wanted to do something different and exciting, and that was the beginning of my VSO journey and the beginning of my first ever visit to Africa and my beginning of understanding diseases like malaria.
VSO is an international organisation that works through volunteers to fight poverty and disease around the world.
Over a period of years, I'd heard a couple of interviews about people that had gone to Russia, Southeast Asia, Africa, and I always thought, I'd like to do that one day. And coming up to retirement, I thought, I'm going to fill in the form and see what happens.
VSO sent Pam to the district of Miria in the northwest of Uganda. In this remote rural area, many people live in poverty. A lot of villages haven't got running water, and people have to get their water from a pump. Life expectancy in Uganda is only 45. Pam worked with a team of local community volunteers who travelled around the district giving families mosquito nets and talking to them about malaria prevention, as well as other health issues.
I was lucky because when I arrived in Uganda, VSO gave me medication, and that was a tablet every day of my stay during my 2 years. So I took the tablet, I never forgot, and I never got malaria. They also gave me a treated mosquito net, which I used every night of my stay there.
If Pam hadn't taken malaria tablets or had forgotten to use her mosquito net, she might have caught malaria living in Miria. And, unfortunately, this is the reality for many of the people she worked with who couldn't afford tablets or mosquito nets.
The only way to prevent getting malaria is to sleep under a treated mosquito net. And of course, local people can't afford to buy them. They're not provided free by the government. They are given out by some charities some of the time.
The volunteers all knew that if the nets weren't used properly, they wouldn't protect anyone from malaria. So education was an essential part of their work.
Oh, sorry, Susan. You need to understand why you need the net, what you're preventing, and how it is best to use the net. So the project that I was working on really believed that giving a net alone isn't enough. You need to have an education package with it.
It was quite a change from Pam's life in England. Pam lived in the community and had to adapt to a very different standard of living, although there were also many similarities.
Well, surprisingly, you can go to a cash point, you can go to a hole in the wall, you can get some money out of your UK bank account if you need it. Having said you can go to the hole in the wall, some days it doesn't work. Some days there's no electricity. It's very much the same. There are shops of a sort, Lucky 7 supermarket, which we used to joke that if there were 7 things you wanted, you were lucky. But you just adjust your life.
Okay.
Pam spent 2 years in Uganda and became part of the community in Miria. Through her work, she didn't just help to change the lives of many people she cared for, she changed her own life too.
I don't think I will ever be the same again. I feel differently about how I live here. I feel differently about how my family live. And I've now been back over a year, and I still haven't been into a big supermarket.
If Pam hadn't gone to Uganda, she would have missed out on a life-changing experience. But is there anything that she would do differently if she could do it all again?
If I were to have the experience again, I probably would have done more homework before I left. I bought the guide to Uganda and I bought a map. And I thought that was probably enough preparation. If I could do it again, I probably would make more effort to contact more people who had actually been in Uganda as a volunteer or working short term, so that I could have been better prepared for what to expect professionally and culturally, from first hand rather than from a book.
Many people are surprised at Pam's decision to start work for VSO at the age of 60, but she believes that waiting until she retired was a good thing.
I don't think I could have done this when I was younger. I wouldn't have had the confidence to do it. I wouldn't have had the skills to have done what I actually did in Miria as a nurse. And I don't think I would have survived very well. I don't know, but personally, for me, I think it was the right time. And it would not have worked so well had I gone when I was younger.
And what was the most rewarding part of her 2 years in Uganda?
People ask this question quite a lot, and it would be quite easy to say that during the time that I was there that we distributed over 6,000 mosquito nets, so that I know that 6,000 families were benefiting. But it was the friendships and the people that I met and that contact with ordinary people in Africa and visiting their homes, sitting on the floor in their mud hut, laughing over something is a joy and an experience that I don't think you can buy. And I felt very, very privileged to be able to do that.